Welcome to the Lane Gorman Trubitt Not-for-Profit Insights webinar series. Like many others, due to the COVID-19 concerns, our not-for-profit live events for 2020 have been canceled. As you have come to rely on our CPE-eligible educational training for 24 plus hours of not-for-profit specific CPE provided throughout the year, we have decided to shift our not-for-profit events into a virtual webinar format called the Not-for-Profit Insights webinar series through the remainder of 2020. A sudden, or even a planned, loss of a key executive can have devastating impacts on fundraising and cash flow. This will impact the nonprofit's credit risk and public profile. In this Zoom webinar, Frost Bank will help you create a structured process to ensure leadership continuity, retention of knowledge, capital, and development of future talent. It was recorded live as a Zoom webinar on September 8, 2020, and all information was accurate and up to date at that time. If you have any questions regarding this webinar or future not-for-profit webinars, please feel free to email us at askus@lgt-cpa.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3 o'clock on the dot, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm Katie Lyles, the Events and Marketing Coordinator here at Lane Gorman Trubitt. I would like to welcome you all to the Not-for-Profit Insights webinar series. Today, Frost Bank has prepared a great presentation on succession planning for nonprofits and community organizations. Lane Gorman Trubitt is a mid-sized accounting firm for all business sizes, and in 2020, LGT will be providing you endless opportunities for gaining CPE credit. These events are created to help your business grow and thrive. Our next webinar will be in October, so keep a lookout for that invite. If you have any questions about this or any of our services or would like to set up a free consultation to determine how we can help your company or organization, please send us an email at askus@lgt-cpa.com. With that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Charlie Pels to tell you a little bit more about Frost Bank and how they are working with nonprofits.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Pels, and I work on the public finance team at Frost Bank in Dallas. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to partner once again with LGT's continuing education team. Frost Bank is a Texas bank founded in 1868 and headquartered in San Antonio. Embedded in our core values and part of our history since the beginning, we strongly believe in helping improve the communities in which we do business. This is the main reason that Frost formed a specialty group at the bank called our Public Finance Division. We understand that nonprofits have slightly different banking needs from our other commercial customers. So our team's goal is to take care of an organization's financial well-being so it can take care of the community. Our nonprofit banking group specializes in providing unique banking services such as capital campaign pledge financing, tax-exempt loans, equipment financing and leasing, real estate loans, collateralized deposits, and more. We would love the opportunity to hear more about your nonprofit organization and become your trusted advisor for any banking needs you may have. Frost Bank is a full-service financial institution offering banking, investment, and insurance products and services. We work in a team-like capacity, which leads me to introduce to you our speaker today, John Sands. John is a Senior Vice President and Regional Private Trust Manager for Frost Wealth Advisors in Dallas. He has worked in the personal trust and fiduciary business for greater than 20 years, providing comprehensive wealth management services. John received his BA from the University of Texas at Austin and his MBA from the American Graduate School of International Management in Glendale, Arizona. He is a certified trust and financial advisor, a certified wealth strategist, and a certified exit planning advisor. He is active in the community, having served on the board of directors for Guardianship Services, the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeos Greeting Committee, Leadership Fort Worth, and the advisory board of the Salvation Army's Adult Rehabilitation Center. Thank you, John, so much for taking this presentation.
All right, are we ready to go? I think so. So greetings everyone, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. I'd like to give a special thanks to Lane Gorman Trubitt for hosting the event. And this is my first time presenting via webinar, so bear with me, please. I'm very excited to be here talking about this subject matter because it is dear to my heart. As mentioned, my name is John Sands, and I'm the Regional Manager for Frost Wealth Advisors Private Trust Department in Dallas. Frost Wealth Advisors has been in the business of trust and fiduciary services since 1919. And as mentioned, Frost Bank's been around since 1868. We still have a significant amount of family and employee ownership. And I think that's important because it helps maintain and keep sustainable our culture. Frost Wealth Advisors, my department, has over $45 billion in trust, advisory, and brokerage assets spread out over individuals, families, and institutional clients. The bank itself has $39 billion in assets, and we're growing fast. We serve a lot of commercial banking clients, and many of those are family-owned businesses. So as you can see, we've been taking care of families and businesses for a long time. I'm part of a team that designed and implemented a special niche service for our family-owned business clients. We call it Family Legacy Services, and it's designed to cater specifically to businesses that are looking towards a liquidity event or an intergenerational transfer. Or as I like to say, giving it to the kids and hoping they don't run it into the ground. Our service actually helps keep that from happening. We hope to make false the old adage, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The service, Family Legacy Services, is actually divided into 3 parts. There's the business succession planning, family governance, and alternative investments. We realized that many of the successful businesses we banked were not ready for the transition when the founder retires or sells the company. So running a business is very different than preparing it to achieve the highest sales price. Very different activities. When we're focused on sales price, we take into account sales strategies that must be documented. Financial statements should be audited by a third party so that people can rely on them. Job descriptions and HR policies need to be codified. CRM systems need to be updated. There's just a lot of activities that can be done to maximize efficiencies in EBITDA. And many times the sales price of an organization is based off of EBITDA. But when the liquidity event eventually happens, family governance and the alternative asset strategies come into play. Family governance is kind of a structured family psychotherapy. It takes many shapes and flavors, but in general, it creates open channels of communication amongst the family members across generations. It can include protocols on the use of family resources like the family ranch or the lake house or the plane. It might provide rules around who can work in the family business and the qualifications for doing so. One of the things we recommend often is that family members that want to work within the business really need to get some outside experience first. Bring that experience to the business and contribute in a worthwhile way by expanding, their experiences. It'll often provide guidelines for distributions to the income beneficiaries from the business. So there has to be a balance between the family-owned business's sustainability and the retention of assets, the retention of cash to grow, but the distribution to the family members as well. So we have to create some structure around that. Otherwise, it can lead to conflicts. Alternative asset strategies are generally longer-term plays that typically are included. They're illiquid, and so they work very well with trusts and foundations. They have a much longer time horizon, so you get an illiquidity premium. There can be strategies for investing in natural resources like timber or oil and gas. Private debt can be useful when interest rates are low like they are right now. Airports, infrastructure, those type of projects can be are forms of private debt and can be relatively lucrative compared to interest rates in the public markets. As I said, these strategies can be very helpful for trusts and foundations. So what does this have to do with succession planning for nonprofits? It really doesn't have anything to do, not yet. So let's get to the point. For 6 years, I served on the board of a nonprofit in Tarrant County. It was the first time I'd really gotten involved. I also participated in a community leader development and networking program called Leadership Fort Worth at about the same time. I jumped in with both feet and had a passion for the organization and its mission. So our primary purpose was to provide guardianship services to individuals who had neither the family nor the friends that were capable or qualified to serve as guardian. These were not pretty cases, and often the client was partially responsible for being in the position that they were in. When someone's in a guardianship, they effectively lose all their rights. On occasion, the court might permit certain activities, but for the most part, someone else decides every aspect of your life. You can't vote, you can't marry, you can't sign contracts, you can't determine your own medical care, nothing, nada. You don't get to make any of your own decisions. So guardianships are harsh and they're extreme, but they're absolutely necessary in some instances when people simply cannot make sufficiently good decisions on how to take care of themselves. Our money management program evolved out of the financial side of the guardianship service. Over time, the organization realized that if they could take over the financial side of a client's affairs, a guardianship might be avoided. You see, elderly and incapacitated people are often preyed upon by others, especially family members. It's a horrible truth that family members perpetrate some of the most horrible crimes against the elderly. Everything from physical abuse to neglect to theft. So what I loved about the mission of this nonprofit is how authentic and genuine it was. They genuinely cared for their clients. The case managers were dedicated and benevolent. In all my time with the organization, care was never an issue. They had and have to this day an incredibly competent staff, social workers and money management case managers. They have also a genuinely devoted army of volunteers who would visit the clients and sometimes provide money management services such as bill paying. And this stopped much of that predatory behavior. When you have control over money, the scoundrels tend to disappear. So no one goes into social work looking to make it big. These are tireless professionals that are on call 24/7. They love their clients in that agape way, that higher form of love and charity that is demonstrated in the unselfish commitment to the welfare of others. What I'm trying to say is that the organization and the staff performed excellently. In no way should the failure of the board and the executive director to effectively plan for succession be a reflection on the competency of the organization or its ability to carry out its mandate. But I am going to point out a series of oversights and mistakes made by the board and the executive director. I was on the board and I assume the burden of having made those mistakes. I wish I had been more proactive. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. Very few nonprofits or small businesses, successful businesses, truly prepare for succession. Sometimes things just get stale. So the social workers were doing a good job. The caseworkers were doing a good job. The board met quarterly and got updates from the executive director. Revenue was steady, and our largest funder, the county, was sufficiently happy with the service that they increased our budget modestly each and every year. We even decided to have an annual fundraiser like we had done back in the day because things were going well. At the beginning of my second 3-year term, I became the board president. I had a very good working relationship with the executive director who I'd known for 3 years now. Many of the old guard board of directors were rolling off, and we were having a lot of success bringing on new board members. There was a lot of excitement in the air, and I was pumped up because we were going to have a party. We were going to have a big party. It was going to be a lot of fun. We were going to raise a ton of money, and that was all I was focused on. Things were so smooth and running so well, I literally thought all we're going to do is plan a party this year. It didn't turn out that way. Now, the executive director had been hired as a Rainmaker by the old guard prior to my joining the board. Every nonprofit should have a Rainmaker as an executive director. And if you can find one, that's great. But if you find that that Rainmaker loses its divining rod, well, then you'll go through a process that we went through called emergency succession planning. I had the wonderful opportunity to go through emergency succession planning, and it is not fun. But before I get into that, I want to provide just a little more context. As I mentioned earlier, on the face of it, the organization looked healthy. It was successful in its mission, despite some undercurrents that were not easily visible to the observant eye. New legislation had recently passed in Texas, and probate judges were instructed to use less restrictive alternatives to guardianships. This would directly impact our guardianship case count. Guardianships would be less frequent, but our money management services would expand exponentially. We would need to reorganize, and the staff would need to handle the changing case counts. The social workers became very concerned about their job security because there were going to be fewer guardianship cases. We really didn't have the staffing for the money management program, and so the money management case managers became overwhelmed. And that's when I started to see the cracks. Morale was dropping quickly amongst the staff. At this time, when securing additional funds was crucial to building out the newly required infrastructure, the executive director did not seem motivated to do so. We began having pretty tense sessions with between the officers of the board and the executive director, but nothing changed except for maybe he became even more complacent. Staff quickly lost confidence in the leadership, and I was beginning to get phone calls from social workers and case managers seeking to vent or elicit some sense of direction. So this was a total breakdown of the chain of command. You'll remember all I wanted to do was plan a party, and we were not having good times at this point. The good times were not flowing. In a very short amount of time, we went into a sort of free fall that ended with the executive director resigning and the search for new leadership commencing. Thankfully, the board was united almost universally throughout the process. We had recently recruited about 7 new board members from various industries and commercial businesses. Historically, the board was comprised of estate planning and probate attorneys and nurses and social workers that dealt with elder care. We now had bankers like myself. We had a retired teacher, a retired business executive from a credit card company, a couple of straight up philanthropists, local philanthropists, an owner of a hospice, and thankfully an HR executive had recently joined our board, in addition to the very quality attorneys that we had. I was very fortunate to work at Frost because they truly believe in community service. We encourage our calling officers and our general staff to get involved. We even provide paid time off to our hourly workers so they can participate in various volunteer activities that might fall outside of normal working hours. However, my manager and myself and I, we had no idea how much of my time this would consume. I spent the next 6 weeks working with my colleagues on the board. We organized into committees, assigning tasks such as programs and services, fundraising, outreach, human resources. The executive director had been the primary point of contact for most of our really big supporters. So we immediately had to assign board members to those supporters to recultivate the relationship that was potentially at risk. Things were really starting to cook. I was on the HR committee, and we had some really smart folks helping out on that committee. One of the first things we did was to pull the executive director's personnel file and start reviewing what he had done and how he had been evaluated. We also began reviewing the job descriptions of the program heads and realized they were woefully out of date. The jobs had evolved, but nothing was documented. That's what I mean about stale. The bread was not moldy, and it looked okay, but it was really only good for toast. The performance measures used to evaluate the executive director were more or less glossed over every year because he was meeting his revenue goals. They were modest, but he was meeting his revenue goals. So no one dug a little bit deeper, and no one was looking towards the future. If budget was being met, we thought, well, things must be going well. But complacency is a problem, especially when the wind starts blowing from a different direction, like what we had with the change in guardianship counts and the changes in the money management program. Financial instability can quickly take hold. There needs to be a vision of the future and a plan for obtaining it. Without a plan and a good leader to communicate it, the staff will become listless and issues will arise and morale will drop. We could not allow morale to drop any lower than it already had. We quickly named the head of our money management program as the interim executive. She was a trusted and faithful servant of the organization. Staff loved her. She'd been there forever. She did not want the responsibility, but she assumed it out of loyalty to the organization. And she realized at that time that although she wasn't leading the organization, she was a natural leader within the organization. And she stepped up to that calling. There was a lot to be done. Board members were assigned responsibility for communicating directly to certain stakeholders. Obviously, the county was first, but we had many more. We directly served, for example, under the Area Agency on Aging. It was crucial that we got out and communicated with these folks in person and that our statements were consistent. We had to have a unified message. Each committee had its goals and objectives. Each of those objectives required multiple activities. So, for example, on finding and hiring a new executive director, we'll kind of run through those steps. First, we had to figure out where and how to post the position. Then we received an unbelievable amount of resumes. I was shocked at how many people wanted to be an executive director of this organization. We were very methodical. And we sat around a giant conference room in Frost Bank branch, multiple evenings after work, sometimes during the day, sorting resumes and reading introduction letters. We got down to a manageable amount of prospective applicants, and then we started interviewing each one. This more nights around the table. We further narrowed it down to 3 applicants and arranged in-person interviews with the board. It was a tedious but very worthwhile endeavor. One of the many benefits of going through this exercise is that we rethought everything. We changed the job descriptions of not only the executive director, but also the department heads. We reimagined what the role of the executive director was going to be and how we were going to compensate him or her. We defined objective goals that could be measured and were outcome-based. The executive director was paid a base salary with a modest bonus if the revenue goal was met, which was pretty normal as far as I understood in the nonprofit world. But we decided, what if we change the goals to better meet our strategic initiatives, like a broader funding base? So, for example, what if we used measures like total net new contributors? What if we reduced the base salary of the executive director, but paid higher incentive comp if the executive director could meet certain benchmarks? And then we defined what those benchmarks were, and they were outcome-based. So, for example, how many net new contributors did we get over this time period? We basically took a for-profit compensation model and applied it to a nonprofit. You have to be careful with this because you don't want your contributors thinking you're paying the executive too much. It can look like your overhead administrative expenses are too high and you discourage people from giving. What's more, you have to have the data to track the performance. And it's not just tracking the data, you have to be able to use the data. Nonprofits are notorious for not spending money on technology. It's counterproductive. You must know who your funders are. You need to know how many you have, what do they give, how often, and what motivates them. You need to know what drives revenue and financial support. Is the annual letter writing campaign effective? Is the amount of time and energy that goes into the grant process of certain organizations worth the time? Or would you be better off investing your time and efforts in another strategy? Same thing with staff development. You cannot take it for granted. We were a relatively small organization. Our budget was about $1 million annually back then. The few office staff members that did not provide direct case management support wore many hats. And that's just what small businesses and nonprofits do to stay afloat. But what will get you into trouble is when a key person leaves and no one knows exactly all the things they did. No one else has been trained to prepare the reports or how to manipulate the access database or whatever is required. When the employee leaves, they can take a wealth of knowledge and experience with them if you're not careful. Not only should there be cross-training for certain key activities, but the knowledge of the organizations should be systematically transmitted to others. I believe mentoring and coaching is the most effective way to do this. Not only does this give someone the benefit of the institutional knowledge so they understand the reason why, but it brings them deeper into the fold. It aligns everyone's purpose with the primary objective, and it makes them feel valued. Now, the story has a happy ending, but it was a tremendous amount of work. I purposely left out some issues that cropped up during the process, but I'm sure you can imagine there was a lot of unfinished business that had to be sorted out. Most of us have been through this at one time or another in the business world. People leave. People leave, and that's the short of it. As I worked on business succession cases for my for-profit clients, I realized a lot of what we were doing to help these companies be sustainable could have been leveraged on the nonprofit side, and I surely wish I had known this before we went through what we went through. Had we engaged in a little of what I'm going to share today, my experience during that transition would have been much smoother. But again, I want to stress that during that entire time, the case managers and staff did an excellent job of taking care of our clients. I don't think the services we were providing suffered to any extent, but the staff was stressed out and the board was stressed out. A little planning could have gone a long way to alleviating that stress and ensuring a sustainable and financially healthy nonprofit. So that was a lot. That's my story. I'm going to jump into the presentation now, which will kind of follow along with that story because it will highlight what we did wrong and some of the things I think would benefit you. So what is succession planning for nonprofits? So here's the definition. Effective succession planning increases the likelihood that a nonprofit will have the strong leadership required to increase an organization's capabilities, effectiveness, and long-term sustainability. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City has a wonderful succession planning toolkit. It If you'll Google Kansas City Fed and nonprofit toolkit, it will come up. Some of the information we're going to go over today is from that toolkit. It's part of the public domain and it's taxpayer funded. I'm a huge fan of what they put in that toolkit. I believe any nonprofit would benefit from utilizing the resources within it. It's got great content. It's got templates for how to do the succession planning, and it's got timelines on what are reasonable steps to take and how long should it take to get to each step. It is just an overall excellent resource. So let's move on down. Page down. So what is the risk of no succession plan? A sudden or even a planned loss of a key executive can have devastating impacts on fundraising and cash flow. This will impact the nonprofit's credit risk and public profile. The stakeholders and the staff probably will be concerned. Programs and activities might suffer. If you've got a good organization and your folks are doing what they're supposed to be doing, a little bit of change at the top is not going to throw them off, but it will make it more difficult. And you will end up expending resources that you had not anticipated expending. And that's mostly time and energy of the board and the staff. So we're going to initially focus on leadership, but staff development is probably just as crucial. A strong leader is critical to the success of the organization, its ability to continue to provide services to the community it serves, and its long-term sustainability. Yet the Kansas City Fed survey suggests that less than 1/3 of nonprofits have a successful leadership transition plan in place. And let's really think about that. How many of those plans are truly thorough? It further estimates in that Kansas City Fed survey that 65 to 70% of executive directors plan on retiring in the next 5 years. And that was a couple of years ago. So basically the executive directors have probably started retiring. So this is a great time to begin transition planning. Just like the baby boomers are doing at selling their businesses at retirement, the executive directors get to retire. And most will want to ensure that the organization is healthy and sustainable for generations. So let's get started. What's the solution? The solution is to create a structured process to ensure leadership continuity, retention of knowledge, and the development of future talent. Executive succession planning must ensure leadership continuity of all key positions. And I truly mean all key positions. Had we lost one of those department heads, it would not have created as much of a problem, but it would have created a tremendous problem. Sometimes in the for-profit cases that we're working on, we'll take the business's organization chart, and smaller businesses are usually flatter. They require employees to wear more hats. So we'll take that org chart and we'll start playing with it. So for example, you may have one employee that may be responsible for managing the office, handling HR issues, resolving logistical problems, distribution snafus, whatever. That person is handling multiple tasks. So we start removing folks from the org chart, and you quickly see how many roles and responsibilities that person had. There's often no redundancy. No one else has those same skills and capabilities or knows exactly how something was done. So for example, that office manager may aggregate reports from multiple systems and put it into a format that is distributed out on some type of periodic basis. It is critically important that if you rely on those reports, that more than one person knows how to prepare them. At the nonprofit I served on, we had a bookkeeper who was a wizard at Excel and Access. And she pulled those reports on a quarterly basis, and they were always error-free. And guess what? No one had her level of sophistication with that data. When she was ready to retire, even with her help, it took a long time to get those reports correct and error-free again. And that was with her help. So what forms of succession planning? Let's see if I can get to the next plate. There we go. So what forms does succession planning take? So we just talked about emergency succession planning, and it's not only for the executive, but also for the senior staff. It's kind of the hold on, we're going for a ride type planning. It's usually preceded by a vulgarity. It always catches you off guard, and it is the most painful way to go through the process. Change is inevitable. People move around for whatever reasons. It creates a lot of stress on everyone, and it sucks up an enormous amount of time and energy. So the way you want to go is the defined departure planning. And that goes along with staff development, but you have to create a blueprint that identifies the issues, the tasks, the responsibilities, and it relieves much of that pressure. You've got a plan, and the plan will require changes on the fly, but you still have a plan. You're not starting from fresh. If it's done properly in a collaborative way, it creates a sense of buy-in. Staff will have, or staff should have, the opportunity to communicate their concerns and create solutions. The executive and the staff will not be as worried about their job security if they understand how they contribute and are given the ability to grow their competencies. They will begin to feel valued. So who's responsible? The board members, the executive, and the key staff. The board members appoint a committee to address transitional issues in communication with key stakeholders. They are the ones that provide clarity of vision. They are the ones that drive the organization's direction. If they're not doing their job. They should understand the complexity and the responsibilities of the executive director. The staff may not, but the board should. The board should also provide regular evaluations and feedback. I think that was one of our greatest deficiencies, is that previous board members, and myself included, we didn't use the evaluation process to thoroughly define the vision for the organization going forward. The board should also leverage their contacts to bring in more board members. I think it was very important for us to have diversity on that board. Diversity not just in the way we think of it, black, white, yellow, brown, but diversity in backgrounds, experiences, jobs, industries. It just allows you to bring more strength to the table when you have people from different viewpoints making contributions. So how does the executive contribute? So the executive should ensure that the legacy planning occurs. They're the ones that are responsible for it. They should be planning their own departure. They should be developing key personnel, and they should encourage professional development. It's very easy to let professional development slide, but when people get to go to seminars and meetings or go to school or anything they can do to build on their strength and competencies, that brings loyalty. And it's very important to have loyalty to a nonprofit. We certainly don't compete on pay. The executive director should also review the plan with that key staff to make sure it's comprehensive. The staff will also be able to point to some holes in the plan. They'll understand where they fit in, and that gives them security. So how do the staff members contribute? Well, they do their job. They provide the services at an optimal level like they had been doing. They keep their head down and keep working, but they need to know what to say, both internally and externally, to the stakeholders. It's very important. And the staff should be communicated to on a regular basis on where are we in this process of transition. So what are the steps to address emergency succession planning? It kind of breaks down into two roles. It's the spokesperson and then responsibilities. So one, you have to identify a key spokesperson. You have to draft a communication plan for the stakeholders, and you have to agree on a process to hire a new executive. But who's going to be the face of the organization is so important. It is why we chose the head of the money management program, because she was so well known throughout the community, and anyone that knew our organization knew that person and knew her strengths and competencies. It's a critical reason also why the board and the staff should be engaged in public relations as well. When you have just one solitary face of the organization and that face is gone, you have to recultivate a lot of relationships. And so it's best to get ahead of that rather than behind it. The next steps are to identify the interim executive, defining the interim executive's responsibilities and authorities, outlining the board supervision of the interim executive, and then identifying executive search task force. I want to speak briefly to the interim executive. As I mentioned, our money management head did not want that role. She didn't want to take on two jobs. So we had to do a very good job of defining what she was going to be responsible for. And then the other tasks that the executive administrator was responsible for were assigned out to the board members. You can't take a stressful situation for someone and make it more stressful by overloading them, but by creating a team around them and sharing the responsibility. Once again, it just reduces the stress and creates more buy-in and loyalty. Because the obvious concerns here are, will the funders, the people that are contributing to your organization, are they going to continue to contribute? Do they trust that the services will continue to be provided at the level that they were being provided? Are we going to continue to carry out our mission? And can we sustain a prolonged decline in income? But there's opportunities as well. The opportunity to reiterate the plan and the vision in a unified, consistent manner, bringing in an executive, explaining to them the new mandate and getting buy-in initially. You have to demonstrate the competency and effectiveness of the staff. Ultimately, you want to show that you can thrive in the midst of change. Everyone needs to know what's going on, and they need to have the ability to communicate it. Much of the risk can be mitigated this way. So what are the considerations for a defined departure? Is the organization ready for a change of leadership style? How supportive is the board in developing a plan and providing resources? How supportive is the current executive develop and implement the plan? And what are the steps being taken to cultivate internal talent for an executive or managerial role or department head? Or what are you doing to identify high-performing staff and develop them? And then what's the process for recruiting externally? Defined departure planning is often based on the expectation of a retiring executive. It allows the organization to position itself for sustainability and continued success. But it can be very hard for a retiring executive to let go to let go of the reins, let the new blood come in and take over. And for the most part, that can be overcome if they participate in the process. This type of planning, the defined departure planning, really gives you an opportunity to create success. Often an interim executive can be appointed to serve as a sort of neutral head before a lot of changes start to take place. People kind of need a cooling off period, but it also gives you some time to rethink your strategy. For example, having a trusted and well thought of interim gave us some time to rethink the compensation plans and the job descriptions. It slowed things down for us, and in a good way. It created opportunities for change. Ultimately, we found an executive who was willing to take a decrease in salary because she could see the new metrics and the new benchmarks that we were basing her incentive comp on, and she knew she would be successful at that. And she has been successful. The budget's grown, the contributors have grown. I believe the budget has grown by more than 50%. I believe it was just under $1.5 million when I last saw, and that was in, after me, but it didn't go up because I left, I don't think, anyway. So let's see if we can move on to the next slide. So retention of knowledge capital. And this really goes back to staff retention and knowing what is the primary purpose of the organization, how we do things, and where are we going. If you want to know how an organization works, you really need to have your staff stick around. Your staff knows more about your clients and your contributors than any system ever will. But just having them around doesn't solve the problem entirely. Mentoring and coaching is critical. It's not just about how we do it, but why we do it. How did we get here? Providing context and the knowledge of our experiences gives perspective. Sometimes you need to know more than the time. Sometimes you really do need to know how the clock was built. Data analysis is very critical. Who is managing the database and who else knows how to do it? The critical questions for data analysis is who are the funders, how much do they give, when do they give, and why do they give? Technology is often a luxury at nonprofits, but knowing the answers to these critical questions often makes the investment in the technology worth it. So what are the steps to address strategic talent development? Well, you should create and implement a strategic plan, including leadership development. The strategic plan should define the leadership requirements necessary to achieve the organization's goals. Keeping the organization's funding model current is a prime example. We needed to expand our source of income. This led to a coordination of work with the county prosecutor to set up an elder care hotline and a referral center, and more money came in. We got people backing these new initiatives. The process works. You should conduct performance evaluations of all the staff rated against strategic objectives. The board should have annual performance evaluations with the executive. This should be a time of discourse and not necessarily one directional. The executive should be encouraged to discuss his or her concerns and the opportunities for improvement of themselves and also the organization. And as I mentioned, I believe this is where we really made a mistake and allowed complacency to step in. The next one is identifying high-performing staff and expanding roles and responsibilities. Staff needs to be given feedback and have a formal plan of development. you have to evaluate outcomes versus activities. People can be busy but ineffective. So objective goals such as revenue or contributor growth are better measures than, say, calls last year or notes input into the system. It's their performance should be rated against the strategic goals of the organization. They should be getting prepared to lead one day. And if we are scared to bring up folks and develop folks because we're worried about our own job security, I don't know, maybe we should be doing something else. It's important that there are multiple relationships with the stakeholders. Our executive director, administrator was our primary point of contact with our biggest funders. That was a mistake. We should have had staff and people involved on the public relations side. Not only does it help solve an at-risk situation when someone leaves, but it gives the junior staff an opportunity to develop, to learn how to network, and to build on their communication skills. So have everyone involved. It's very important. So really, in summary, focusing on leadership continuity, retention of knowledge, and development of future talent. Some folks are just natural leaders, and some folks can be cultivated into better leaders than the natural ones because they'll try harder. You have to identify those folks, and you have to promote them up, and you have to give them more responsibilities if you're not going to promote them. You'll find that balance somewhere, but don't let your high performers languish in the ether. When the organization believes in its staff, identifies the higher performers, regularly evaluates and provides feedback, and expands their roles, the staff's loyalty will increase substantially, and fear of job insecurity will diminish. Experience counts for a lot. The institutional experience that formed the organization must be passed down. Coaching and mentoring, I believe, are the most effective ways of doing this. Investing in technology is also important because it provides the mechanism for measuring your success. Outcomes are more important than activities. It always saddens me to see a young professional in the bank move on to greener pastures. I'm always happy for their opportunity, but disappointed that we couldn't find a place for them. You have to challenge your high performers or you risk losing them. So leadership goes hand in hand with staff development. Excuse me, a little parched. Last valuable resource is the Kansas City Fed. Again, I highly recommend that you Google it. There are some great resources, great content. And then finally, our disclaimers. So with that, I guess I will turn it over to Katie to see if we have any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John, so much for that great presentation. Currently, we don't have any questions, but we still have a little bit of time.
I will tell you that the experience that I had working with the nonprofit, and I haven't named them, I don't know if I should or not, but it was a wonderful organization. There's so many good nonprofits and community organizations out there, and so few of them have the resources or time to take succession planning into consideration. But a little bit of planning at the beginning can really make a big difference down the line. I can't tell you how stressful that whole process of hiring someone new was, the process of alleviating the fears of the staff, because the executive director had been a Rainmaker. He had brought in really good money and things just kind of got stale. And every organization gets stale at some point in time. Very few organizations just, take off like Amazon and keep going. But if you can slow it down and you can map out the strategy to go forward, you're going to reduce the amount of stress. You're going to have a tremendous amount more buy-in from your stakeholders, not just the people that contribute, but your staff, the other people that you're supporting. So if your organization supports other organizations, it's critical that they know that if a lapse in leadership happens, that you will be able to continue to provide those services. The Area Agency on Aging had great confidence in our staff, and we were able to move forward. But they were concerned of why the executive director had resigned so quickly. And these things just happen. And so if you're not doing just a little bit of preparation for it, and you're not communicating what needs to be done to the staff, and something happens, a triggering event occurs, you're going to spend 5 times the amount of energy and effort trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's one of those things you put more time in now for less stress and time later on. I think that's really important to touch on.
And that's the beauty of the Kansas City Fed's toolkit, is it's got multiple different types of templates. So you don't have to think of this stuff on your own. We had to think about it all on our own. I wish I'd have known that template was out there, because it gives you a structured process for how to do it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel again.
And I did send a link to the succession plan from the Kansas City Fed in the chat. So if you haven't looked at that, you can feel free to click on that link so you have it after the webinar. Well, I don't see any questions in the Q&A function. You will also find the course evaluation link in the chat as well. It should pop up in your browser after you leave this webinar. Thank you again, John, and everyone at Frost Bank for your time. I think everyone really appreciates it. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciated having the opportunity to present today.
Thank you for joining us. To stay up to date on all of the webinars for this series, please make sure to follow our events page for more information. The link is in the description below, along with other important links, including our social media. If you want to see future Lane Gorman Trubitt Not-for-Profit Insights webinar series, subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications.